Our next guest is an award-winning filmmaker. Brian Knappenberger made a film I found quite moving, The Internet's Own Boy, the story of Aaron Swartz, who I knew, who actually helped me learn some social media skills. He is also the director of We Are Legion, the story of the hacktivists, also excellent. And his new documentary is entitled, I've got democracy on the brain, is entitled Nobody Speak, Hulk Hogan, Gawker, and Trials of a Free Press. So first of all, Brian, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. We've actually dropped the Hulk Hogan Gawker from the title, so it's Nobody Speak, Trials of the Free Press.
Okay, all right. Well, I misspoke. Okay, so first of all, it is about the Gawker trial, the lawsuit regarding the Hulk Hogan video. And I guess start with this. For people who don't know, what's the brief background on that particular trial?
Well, I was really fascinated by the trial itself between Hulk Hogan and Gawker Media. Gawker Media posted an 8 seconds excerpt of a sex tape of Hulk Hogan, a tape of Hulk Hogan having sex with the wife of his then best friend, Bubba the Love Sponge. Bubba the Love Sponge is a Florida shock jock radio DJ. And Gawker got a hold of this tape, edited it down, and posted this along with an article that described the tape. It said some of the context of why of how it had gotten there and with the backstory. And Hulk Hogan ended up taking Gawker to court. It was a protracted kind of dispute, and it ended last year. I was really interested in that case because for me, it was, well, first of all, it was just kind of fascinating and compelling. It was the first time a sex tape case like this had ever gone to trial. And even though it had this kind of veneer of celebrity and tabloid sensationalism, you could also tell that there were some pretty big issues at stake, privacy versus First Amendment. And, you know, my past work has focused in both of those areas. I've done films that have been centered around the First Amendment, and I've done films that were concerned. I've been a privacy advocate. So I was interested in that by itself. But what made me want to make the film is this sort of dramatic conclusion to the trial, which was that there was a judgment in favor of Hogan against Gawker for $140 million. So it was a staggering amount of money. And with that became a requirement for Gawker to put up $50 million right away. That was essentially the death sentence of Gawker. So here you had a trial that was trying to sort through very complex issues between privacy and the First Amendment that ended in this very sort of dramatic fashion. And it was revealed right after that Silicon Valley investor, one of the co-founders of PayPal, first outside investor of Facebook, billionaire Peter Thiel was actually bankrolling Hulk Hogan's lawsuit, and that made it a very different kind of story for me. That Mr. Thiel was doing this in secret in order to exact revenge against an outlet that he didn't like for whatever reason that he didn't like. So that became something that was disturbing to me, the secrecy of that, and that's why I dug in. And that was the beginning of just a very intense year where this story took lots of twists and turns, but also it was set against the backdrop of another highly litigious billionaire on his way towards the presidency of the United States.
Yeah, I think there's so many fundamental issues raised by this story. I also followed that trial quite closely, and there was something that seemed off about it at the time. If you followed these kinds of cases before, there were moments in the trial's history where the suit could have been covered by insurance, and it was directed away from that, thereby stripping Gawker of that level of protection. There were just various things that happened that were odd along the way. And when it came out that Peter Thiel was behind it, Peter Thiel, very famous libertarian, Donald Trump supporter, which is unusual in the Silicon Valley, or was at any rate, it clearly had an agenda here. So, I think it's interesting, the way you framed it, and again, we're talking with Brian Knappenberger, director of the new film, Nobody Speak. The way you framed it is important, Brian, the sort of collision between two rights, the right to privacy and the right to publish. But when it comes to the right to any human right, it's sometimes the people we're called upon to defend are undesirable, or we may not find them particularly appealing, and that may be the case with Gawker's behavior here. But did you come away with a point of view on this? Were you more sympathetic to Gawker? Did you feel this was an unjust trial, or was the ambivalence the primary theme for you?
Well, I definitely come away with a point of view on the secretive use of big money behind the scenes to influence news and public opinion. But as for the trial, you're absolutely right. The most interesting kind of free speech and civil liberties cases clearly don't happen sort of in the center, where there are crystal clear villains and heroes, and where everything is sort of obvious in black and white. Always the most definitive cases when it comes to these kinds of things are at the fringes, and I do think this was at the fringes. I do think Gawker, some people hated it, some people loved it. Some of the people that were the victims or the targets of its most vicious takedowns were actually ended up being its biggest fans. It was a complicated relationship. They clearly attracted hatred. They courted it in some ways. A lot of people reacted, I think, to the tone of Gawker, which the word snarky is used quite a bit to describe that. They pushed the boundaries a lot and sometimes crossed lines. I think it's an interesting thing. I am more of a freedom of speech person and a freedom of speech advocate. I believe very strongly in the First Amendment. I think freedom of speech is maybe the major pillar of our of the American experiment. But it's also there are also times in which it's challenged in all sorts of ways, and this was one of them. So I didn't pick this, I wasn't compelled by this because it was easy. I was compelled by this case because it was complex, because it was on the fringes of acceptability, and I had some sympathy even for Hulk Hogan's case.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. First of all, I should, also put my cards on the table and say, if I'm not a First Amendment absolutist when it comes to freedom of the press, I'm pretty darn close. I feel very strongly that people should be able to publish, unless it poses a clear and present threat, or is libelous, or obviously reasonable controls on that. But I have to say, this is a story that here's my take, and I want to know what you think. It's a story that may not have any heroes, but it has a villain. And that's my reaction to the information you put together into the story as a whole. To me, Peter Thiel is the villain of this story, because he deliberately, secretly funded a case that was designed not to elevate through the courts and debate the issue, the complex issues involved, but specifically structured in such a way as to destroy a media outlet he disliked. That, to me, is a villainous thing to do. That said, Hulk Hogan is not, I'm sympathetic to his point of view, the invasion of privacy, the discomfort, as well as, the woman and her husband. And Gawker are unappealing people, but in this case, I don't know that they were villains. I think they might have been vile, but I don't know if they were villains. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think, again, I was so sort of interested. I think this is a strong and interesting debate that we need to have as a country, this sort of tension. In fact, it goes back quite a ways, this tension between privacy and the First Amendment. Some of the people struggled with this question way back to the first cameras. The camera, when the Brownie the Kodak Brownie was introduced, Louis Brandeis and others made comments about this and privacy. So this is something that is very much a part of the digital age. So I was compelled by that. I am. You say you're extremist. I'm more extreme than most people I know in terms of the permissiveness that should be allowed under the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects a whole broad range of speech, including hate speech, and I think that's actually a good thing. The ability to contain a broad range of dialogue in the public sphere, and also to contain within that protest against that dialogue, a kind of loud, sometimes messy conversation that I think has been right at the heart of the American experiment since the beginning. What worries me sometimes, and this is part of the film, is that is the sorts of things going on behind the scenes that are secret, that are invisibly kind of influencing that conversation, that the lack of transparency. And I think that's what bothers me about what Mr. Thiel did here. He, what he did, as I understand it, used to actually be illegal. Secretive third-party financing was illegal all the way back in the United States, all the way back to common law up until the late 50s. In the United States, you couldn't do that. The legal term was called champerty, and there's another legal term called maintenance, in which it was illegal for a third party to enter an existing dispute and prolong the dispute, encouraging the parties not to settle. This was illegal up until the late 50s, and what happened was the NAACP was filing lots of lawsuits in order to try to end segregation. Of course, Brown versus the Board of Education is the most famous. But, the opponents to the NAACP wanted to force the NAACP to give up its donor list, so the people that were giving money to the NAACP. And the court said no, rejected that. So some of these laws, in a limited way, were overturned at that period of time. But I think that's something very different than what's happening here. If the NAACP backs a lawsuit, or the ACLU backs a lawsuit, or if Sierra Club or Greenpeace or any organization backs a lawsuit, it's them. It's Greenpeace. It's the ACLU. What their political position is. And you understand, everybody understands what's going on there. This is different than that. This is a single individual with a grudge that wants to silence a publication that he found, that was critical to him, but it was also that he found odious. And so for whatever reason that is, the secrecy of it, the reason he hated them, the secrecy of it bothers me. That also is what bothers me about the Sheldon Adelson story, the purchasing of the Las Vegas Review-Journal in secret. Right. That's the key element here. Lots of rich people have owned newspapers, obviously, but the secret aspect of it deprives the public of valuable information about where the paper is coming from and what their perspective is and where the conflicts of interest are. So that's I think is what the difference is.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. It touches on transparency. Just out of curiosity, because it's nagging away at me, why did you drop Hulk Hogan and Gawker from the name of the movie?
Part of that's filmmaking reasons. It's just got kind of cumbersome to have that long of a title. But also, it was pretty clear to us that, this film is not only about that case. This film is about looking at this kind of secretive behind the scenes, silencing of critical voices. So, we understood pretty clearly on that this was that we were going at something broader, and it seemed limiting somehow to have Hulk Hogan and Gawker in the trial, in the title. And that's partly a film. You make these decisions along the way.
Sure. And I guess last question, was there anything you followed that you said you followed the case at the time, as a lot of us did? Was there anything you discovered in the making of this film that really surprised you?
Well, The biggest surprise was, yeah, actually a lot on this one, more so than the average film. The biggest surprise is the thing that actually triggered us wanting to make the documentary, and that was both the $140 million verdict, which was just eye-popping, and the revelation that Peter Thiel was behind Hulk Hogan's case. We were considering doing a piece about Peter Thiel before, and his relationship to Silicon Valley, and so that was just a staggering revelation. But all of that was being done in the early stages of the very bizarre presidential election, in which Trump was gaining a lot of fuel and a lot of energy from criticizing the media, and you could tell that was something that resonated with his supporters. And so, and really was a kind of echo of, I thought, of what was happening in this trial, in this courtroom in Florida. And where it seemed like the media was on trial, and there was a real kind of hatred for the media, and that was a kind of seemed like an undercurrent of this trial. So that was, at that point, we were just kind of hanging on for the ride. The other big surprise, I think a lot of people were surprised. Actually, I actually thought that Trump might win the election most of last summer, but when it came down to it, it actually was a bit of a surprise. And watching this film the day after the election was an experience I've never felt as a filmmaker. It was pretty clearly, it was pretty obvious that we were making a film that was different than the film we thought we were making 24 hours before. And so, as we shaped it and changed it after that, it was a different film. Trump was always in this film, but it was cautionary. What if this guy who says that he's going to open up libel laws and sue you like you've never been sued before, as he's pointing to the press, what if that guy's our president? And suddenly he was. So that was a surprise.
All right. Well, where can people go to watch this film?
Netflix.
Netflix. Okay.
Yep.
Well,
it's on Netflix. Netflix, 100 million viewers. 100 million subscribers to Netflix. It's available in 190 countries in 25 different languages.
Which means
that blows my mind, actually.
No, it is mind-blowing. It is amazing.
Like
and I'm glad this movie, which is on such an important topic, is available to all those 100 million people. So thank you for making it, Brian Knappenberger. The movie is Nobody Speak, Trials of a Free Press. And thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.